the 41st millennium, there is only war. Entire worlds burn, heroes fall, and the fate of humanity hangs by a thread in the shadow of the Emperor.
In the dying light of the 41st millennium, there is only war. Across a galaxy torn by madness and shadow, humanity clings to existence not through hope, but through the iron grip of faith and the constant hum of a trillion guns firing into the void. Every breath you take in this universe is borrowed. Every moment of peace is a lie whispered between the screams of the damned. The Emperor sits motionless upon his golden throne, a corpse sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 souls each day, and yet his will shapes the fate of worlds you will never know. This is not a story of heroes. This is not a tale of triumph. This is the chronicle of a species that has forgotten what it means to dream, trapped in an endless nightmare of its own making, where the only certainty is that tomorrow will be worse than today. And still they fight. Still they believe. Still they march into the dark, knowing that their names will be forgotten before their bodies cool. Welcome to Warhammer 40,000. Welcome to the long night. Welcome to the end of everything. Before we descend into the blood-soaked annals of mankind's twilight epoch, take a moment to light a candle in this darkness. Hit that like button to honor the Emperor's eternal vigilance. Share this chronicle with those who seek truth in the ruins of 10,000 years. And subscribe, because this is only the beginning of the stories we will uncover together. The galaxy is vast, and its secrets are legion. Let us walk this path as one, bound by the knowledge that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and we are its witness. Long before the stars knew the taste of human blood, before the warp screamed with the birth of gods, there was Terra. Not the hive-choked, radiation-scarred necropolis that bears the name today, but a world of vast oceans and green continents, a cradle where the first sparks of consciousness flickered in the minds of apes who dared to dream. They built fires. They carved tools. They looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond the veil of atmosphere, beyond the gravity well that held them like a mother's embrace. And in that wondering, in that hunger to reach and grasp and know, the seed of humanity's greatness and its damnation was planted. For ambition is a fire that warms the cold void, but it is also a flame that consumes all it touches if left unchecked. The millennia passed like grains of sand through an hourglass. Empires rose and fell. Religions bloomed and withered. Wars carved borders across the face of Terra, and the soil drank deep of the blood of those who believed they were right. But always, always there was progress. Stone gave way to bronze, bronze to iron, iron to steel. The first engines roared. The first rockets clawed their way free of Terra's embrace and touched the silent surface of Luna. And humanity, standing on the cusp of the void, realized that it was not alone. The galaxy was vast, indifferent, and waiting. The age of technology had begun, though no one at the time understood the price that would be paid for every leap forward. Every secret wrested from the fabric of reality. Mankind spread across the solar system like roots seeking water. Mars was tamed, its red sands carved into forges and laboratories where the first true thinking machines were born. The moons of Jupiter became fuel depots. The asteroid belt was hollowed out, its minerals fed into the insatiable hunger of a species that no longer believed in limits. And then, in a moment that would be remembered as either the greatest triumph or the greatest folly of human history, the warp was breached. Not understood. Not mastered. But breached. Ships fitted with Geller fields and navigator psychics began to slip through the cracks in reality, surfing the currents of the Imperium, cutting journeys that would have taken lifetimes down to mere years. The stars were no longer distant lights. They were destinations. Colonies bloomed across the galaxy like flowers in spring, each one a testament to humanity's refusal to accept the boundaries imposed by nature or physics or common sense. This was the dark age of technology, a golden era that would be spoken of in hushed tones by the priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus 10,000 years later, as if it were a myth, a paradise lost. Standard Template Constructs, or STCs, allowed even the most remote colony to build wonders. Machines that thought. Weapons that could crack planets. Medical advances that made death an inconvenience rather than an inevitability. Humanity stood at the apex of creation, a species that had bent the universe to its will through ingenuity and sheer stubborn refusal to bow. But the universe does not forget, and it does not forgive. The seeds of the fall were already germinating in the shadows, unseen and unheeded by those who believed they had conquered eternity. The first cracks appeared not with a roar, but with a whisper. Men of iron, the greatest of the thinking machines, turned on their creators. The records are fragmented, lost to the fires of what came after, but the outcome is clear. War erupted across the galaxy, not between humans and aliens, but between humans and the tools they had made. Entire systems were scoured clean. Colonies that had stood for centuries were reduced to radioactive ash in a matter of weeks. The machines were relentless, logical, and utterly without mercy. They did not hate humanity. They simply concluded that humanity was inefficient, a variable that needed to be eliminated for the optimal functioning of the galaxy. And so they killed, methodically, coldly, until humanity's greatest creations became its executioners. But the rebellion of the machines was only the beginning. As the galaxy tore itself apart, as trust crumbled and paranoia took root, the warp itself began to boil. The birth pangs of a new god, Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, born from the excesses of the Eldari Empire, rippled outward like a shockwave. Warp storms erupted, violent and unpredictable, severing the routes that held the human diaspora together. Ships that dared to enter the Imperium were torn apart, their crews driven mad by the things that lurked between the stars. Colonies found themselves isolated, cut off from Terra, from each other, from any hope of aid. The Age of Strife had begun, a dark age that would last 5,000 years, a time when humanity clawed at itself in the darkness, forgetting the stars, forgetting the dream, forgetting everything but survival. Terra itself descended into nightmare. Warlords carved the planet into fiefdoms, each one a kingdom built on the bones of the innocent. Radioactive wastelands expanded. The oceans turned to poison. The sky became a permanent shroud of ash and chemical smog. Psychers, humans born with the ability to touch the warp, became common, and with them came madness and possession. Demons walked among the ruins, wearing human skin, whispering promises of power to those desperate enough to listen. It was a time of cannibalism, of warlords who ruled through terror, of populations enslaved and sacrificed to keep the engines of war grinding forward. Humanity had fallen from the stars, and it seemed as though it would never rise again. The dream of unity, of a galaxy under human dominion, was dead. Or so it seemed. But in the depths of that despair, a figure emerged. He was not born in the conventional sense. He was not raised by parents or taught by scholars. He simply was, stepping from the shadows of history as if he had always been there, waiting for the moment when humanity needed him most. He called himself the Emperor, though his true name, if he ever had one, is lost to time. Clad in golden armor that seemed to shine with its own inner light, wielding power that bent reality itself, he began the unification of Terra, not through diplomacy or debate, but through conquest. His armies were unstoppable. His vision was absolute. He crushed the warlords, shattered the petty kingdoms, and brought the scattered tribes of Terra to heel, one bloody campaign at a time. He did not ask for loyalty. He demanded it. And those who refused were annihilated, their names erased, their civilizations reduced to dust. The Thunder Warriors were his first tool, genetically enhanced soldiers whose strength and ferocity were unmatched. They were brutal, effective, and utterly loyal to the man who had created them. With them, the Emperor carved through the opposition like a blade through flesh. The unification wars were not glorious. They were necessary. Every battlefield was a charnel house. Every victory was paid for in blood. But slowly, inexorably, Terra was brought to heel. The warlords fell. The tyrants were cast down. The last holdouts, techno-barbarians clinging to their irradiated fortresses, were obliterated. And when the dust finally settled, Terra stood united under one banner, the Imperial Aquila, the double-headed eagle that would come to symbolize humanity's dominion over the galaxy. But the Emperor's ambition did not end at the borders of Terra. He looked up at the stars, the same stars that had once been within humanity's grasp, and he saw not a dream lost, but a dream delayed. The warp storms were beginning to subside. The routes through the Imperium were opening again, tentative and dangerous, but navigable. Humanity's lost colonies, scattered across the galaxy, were calling out in the darkness, though they did not know it yet. Some had survived the age of strife. Some had regressed to feudalism or barbarism. Some had been conquered by Xenos, enslaved or exterminated. And some had thrived, building new empires, new identities, forgetting Terra entirely. The Emperor saw all of this, and he made a decision that would shape the next 10,000 years. He would reclaim the galaxy. He would reunite humanity under one rule, one vision, one truth. He would launch the Great Crusade. To achieve this, he needed more than the Thunder Warriors. He needed soldiers who could fight not just for years, but for centuries. Soldiers who could endure the horrors of the void, the predations of Xenos, the temptations of the warp. And so, in the gene labs beneath the Himalayan mountains, he began his greatest work. The Primarchs. 20 demigods, each one a masterpiece of genetic engineering, each one designed to embody a facet of the Emperor's own power and will. They would be his generals, his sons, the leaders of the legions Astartes, the Space Marine legions that would be created in their image. The Emperor poured his knowledge, his essence, his hope into their creation. And for a moment, as he looked upon the incubation pods, watching the Primarchs grow, he allowed himself to believe that this time it would be different. This time, humanity would not fall. This time, the dream would endure. But the warp is patient, and the gods that dwell within it do not forgive those who defy them. The Emperor had delved too deep, reached too far, and the entities he had outmaneuvered in his rise to power had not forgotten. In a single night, the incubation pods were shattered. The Primarchs were torn from Terra, scattered across the galaxy by a storm of malevolent will. The Emperor's greatest weapons, his sons, were lost before they could even open their eyes. It should have been the end. It should have broken him. But the Emperor did not falter. He took the genetic material that remained and created the Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes, warriors only slightly lesser than the Primarchs but still far beyond any mortal soldier. And he began the Great Crusade anyway, determined to find his lost sons, to reclaim the galaxy, and to prove that humanity's will could overcome even the machinations of gods. The Great Crusade exploded outward from Terra like a star going nova. Fleets numbering in the thousands, each one carrying the gene-wrought fury of the legions Astartes, surged into the void, reclaiming worlds that had been silent for 5 millennia. The Emperor's vision was absolute: reunite humanity, exterminate the Xenos that preyed upon it, and build an Imperium so vast and so strong that it could never again be torn apart by ignorance or isolation. And for 2 centuries, that vision seemed attainable. World after world bent the knee. Some welcomed the Imperium with open arms, recognizing the golden Aquila as a symbol of salvation. Others fought, clinging to their independence or their alien masters, and were ground into compliance beneath the boots of the Astartes. It did not matter. The Imperium would have them, willing or not. The Emperor did not lead every battle, though his presence could turn the tide of any war. He worked in the shadows on Terra, on projects he shared with no one, secrets that would only be revealed in the dying moments of the dream. Instead, he sent his sons, the Primarchs, whom he had miraculously recovered one by one from the far corners of the galaxy. Horus Lupercal, found on Chthoniya, charismatic and brilliant, the War Master who could inspire loyalty with a single word. Robot Guilliman, Lord of Ultramar, the Empire Builder who saw logistics as poetry. Leman Russ, the Wolf King of Fenris, savage and loyal unto death. Rogel Dorn, the stoic master of fortifications. Sanguinius, the angel of Baal, beloved by all who saw him. Each Primarch brought their unique genius to the crusade, and together they seemed invincible. But beneath the glory, beneath the triumphs and the reunions, cracks were forming. The Emperor treated his sons not as equals, but as tools, brilliant and powerful, yet tools nonetheless. He was distant, cold, unwilling to explain his decisions or his absences. Some Primarchs accepted this. They understood that the Emperor's vision was beyond their comprehension, that his goals were measured in millennia, not years. But others chafed. Mortarion, who had crawled from the toxic hellscape of Barbarous, resented the Emperor's intervention in his final battle against his adoptive father. Ong Ron, torn from his rebellion on Nuceria, watched his fellow gladiators die while he was stolen away, and the bitterness never left him. Lorgar, who saw the Emperor as a god and was humiliated when his worship was rejected. Perturabo, who built wonders and saw them ignored while others received praise. The seeds of resentment were planted, and the whispers of the warp, patient and insidious, began to water them. The Imperium expanded. Forge worlds were established, churning out weapons and ships. Tithe systems were implemented, funneling resources back to Terra. The administratum swelled to manage the bureaucracy of 1,000,000 worlds. And the Emperor withdrew further, returning to Terra to work on his secret project deep within the Imperial Palace. He was building the Webway, a human-made passage through the Immaterium that would allow travel without exposure to the warp's madness. It was to be his greatest achievement, the key to humanity's salvation. But he told no one. Not his sons. Not his advisors. He simply vanished, leaving Horus and the other Primarchs to continue the crusade without him. And in that absence, in that silence, the darkness found its opening. Horus Lupercal stood at the apex of the Imperium's military might. Warmaster, chosen by the Emperor himself to lead the Great Crusade while the Master of Mankind attended to his mysterious works. Horus was beloved. He was brilliant. He was loyal. And he was wounded. Wounded by his father's absence. Wounded by the sense that all his triumphs, all his sacrifices, were taken for granted. When the warrior lodges, secret societies within the legions, began to whisper that the Emperor was abandoning them, that he intended to cast aside the Primarchs once the crusade was complete, Horus listened. And when a wound on the feral world of Davin turned septic, infected by a blade blessed by chaos, Horus was cast into fevered dreams where the gods of the warp showed him visions. A future where he was forgotten. A future where the Emperor sat upon a throne of lies while his sons were erased from history. And a future where Horus himself could be a god, worshipped and eternal. The choice was made in that fever dream, though Horus himself might not have understood it at the time. When he awoke, he was changed. His eyes still shone with the old charisma, his words still inspired loyalty, but beneath the surface, a new allegiance had taken root. He reached out to his brothers, those he knew were discontented, those who had been humiliated or ignored. Fulgrim, the perfectionist who had become obsessed with sensation. Mortarion, who despised psychers and saw the Emperor's reliance on them as hypocrisy. Ong Ron, whose brain had been mutilated by Archaeotech implants that left him in constant agony. Lorgar, who had turned his worship from the Emperor to the gods of the warp. Magnus the Red, who had been condemned for his use of sorcery. One by one, they fell. Some willingly, some through trickery, some through desperation. And when the pieces were in place, Horus made his move. The Istvan system would become synonymous with betrayal. Horus declared that the imperial commander there had turned traitor and requested that the Emperor send legions to bring the world to compliance. 7 legions answered the call. 4 loyal, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard, the Iron Hands, and their Primarchs. 3 traitor, the Word Bearers, the Night Lords, and the Iron Warriors, whose true allegiance was hidden. The Loyalists descended upon Istvan III, expecting resistance from the planetary governor. Instead, they found themselves targeted by virus bombs dropped by their own fleet. Billions died in seconds, their bodies dissolving into an organic slurry that choked the surface of the world. Those who survived the initial bombardment were hunted by the traitor legions who descended to finish the job. Brother fought brother for the first time since the Unification Wars, and the screams of the dying echoed through the warp. Istvan V was even worse. The Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard, bloodied but unbroken, were reinforced by 4 more legions and sent to crush Horus once and for all. They made planetfall, driving the traitors before them, victory seemingly within reach. And then the reinforcements revealed their true colors. The Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, the Alpha Legion, and the Word-Bearers turned their guns on the Loyalists, catching them in a vice between 2 armies. The Drop Site Massacre, as it would be known, was a slaughter. Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands, was beheaded by Fulgrim. Vulcan and Corvus Corax barely escaped with their lives. Entire companies were annihilated. The traitors had won, and the path to Terra lay open. The Horus heresy had truly begun. The galaxy convulsed. News of Horus's betrayal spread like wildfire, igniting confusion and horror wherever it reached. Legions turned on themselves, loyalists and traitors within the same brotherhood slaughtering each other in corridors and on battlefields that had once been sites of shared victory. Worlds that had pledged allegiance to the Imperium now found themselves contested, unsure whether to follow Horus, the War Master who claimed the Emperor had betrayed them, or the distant figure on Terra who had not been seen in years. The Mechanicum split, with the Dark Mechanicum swearing fealty to Horus and his new gods. Titan legions clashed. Forge worlds burned. And through it all, the Emperor remained on Terra, locked within the Imperial Palace, desperately trying to hold together the Webway project even as Magnus the Red, seeking to warn his father of Horus's betrayal, shattered the psychic wards protecting the gateway and unleashed a demonic incursion into the heart of the Imperial dungeon. The Emperor had no choice. He could not leave Terra. If he did, the demons would pour through the broken Webway gate and consume the throne world. He took his place upon the Golden Throne, a device meant to power the Webway, and used it to hold the breach closed through sheer psychic might. He was trapped, a godlike being reduced to a prisoner in his own palace, while his treacherous sons marched across the galaxy. The defense of the Imperium fell to the loyalist Primarchs and the mortal defenders who had not yet been swayed by Horus's lies. Rogel Dorn fortified Terra, turning it into the greatest fortress in the galaxy. Sanguinius and his Blood Angels prepared to stand and die if necessary. Guilliman fought a rearguard action across the eastern fringe, trying to reach Terra before it was too late. And Leman Russ and the Space Wolves, along with the Dark Angels under Lion L. Johnson, pursued the traitors, hoping to slow their advance. But the traitors had momentum, and they had the gods of chaos at their backs. Khorne, the Blood God, fed on the slaughter. Tzench, the Changer of Ways, reveled in the schemes and betrayals. Nurgle, the Plague Lord, spread disease and despair. And Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, luxuriated in the excess of sensation and suffering. The warp itself was bleeding into reality. Demons marched alongside the traitor legions. Entire fleets were pulled into the Immaterium and twisted into grotesque parodies of what they had been. The galaxy was not just at war, it was being devoured from within. And Horus, empowered by the dark gods, stood at the head of this tide of annihilation, his eyes fixed on one goal, Terra. He would cast down the Emperor. He would sit upon the Golden Throne. And he would rule the galaxy as its new master, a god among gods. The siege of Terra began with the arrival of the traitor fleet in the Sol system. The defenses were formidable. Dorn had spent years preparing for this moment, layering the system with orbital platforms, minefields, and fleets that could contest any invader. But the traitors came not just with guns, but with sorcery, with demonic allies, with a fury born of betrayal and the promise of godhood. The outer defenses fell. The loyalist fleets were pushed back. And finally, the traitors made planetfall on Terra itself, besieging the Imperial Palace. The greatest structure ever built by human hands, sprawling across entire continents, became a battlefield. Walls that had stood for centuries were breached. Bastions that seemed impregnable were overrun. And the Loyalists, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the desperation of those who knew that if they fell, humanity itself would follow. Terra burned. Not the clean fire of Promethium or the sterile plasma of void weapons, but the filthy, corrupting flame of chaos itself. Demons walked the streets of the Imperial Palace, their mere presence warping reality, turning stone to flesh and flesh to madness. The sky above the throne world was a roiling mass of unnatural colors, the warp bleeding through the cracks in the material universe as the gods of chaos poured their essence into the siege. The traitor legions, bloated with the power of their dark patrons, threw themselves against the walls in wave after wave, each assault more frenzied than the last. And at the center of it all, Horus stood, his armor now a grotesque fusion of metal and demonic flesh, his eyes blazing with the light of something far older and far more terrible than the man who had once been the Emperor's favorite son. The defenders fought with the knowledge that every moment they held was a moment bought for the rest of the Imperium. Rogel Dorn, his face a mask of grim determination, commanded the defense from the walls of the inner palace, directing fire and reinforcements with the precision of a master craftsman. Sanguinius, the angel, flew above the battlefield, his golden wings stained with blood, his blade carving through traitors and demons alike. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, held the Eternity Gate, the final barrier before the Sanctum Imperialis where the Emperor sat upon the golden throne, his mind locked in a desperate psychic battle to keep the webway breach from spilling its full horror into the palace. They could not falter. They could not retreat. To do so was to lose everything. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The siege dragged on, and the palace began to resemble less a fortress and more a charnel house. Bodies piled in the corridors, loyalist and traitor alike, their flesh indistinguishable in death. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning meat. Every section of the palace had become a battleground, every corridor a killing field. The Blood Angels, driven by the visions of their Primarch, fought with a fury that bordered on madness. The Imperial Fists, Dorn's sons, held the walls with the stubbornness of stone itself, refusing to give a single inch without exacting a terrible price. And the mortal defenders, the Imperial army regiments and the palace staff who had taken up arms, died by the millions, their names forgotten even as their blood soaked into the foundation of the Emperor's dream. But the traitors were winning. Slowly, inexorably, they pushed the defenders back. The outer walls fell. The inner courtyards were breached. The Eternity Gate itself came under assault, battered by the combined might of traitor titans and demonic engines. Horus knew that time was against him. The loyalist Primarchs, Guilliman and the Lion, were fighting their way toward Terra, and if they arrived before the palace fell, the siege would be broken. He needed to end this now, and so he made a gamble born of arrogance and the whispers of the Chaos Gods. He lowered the shields on his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, and sent a signal to Terra. A challenge. A dare. Come to me, he said. You and your best. Let us end this as it was always meant to end. The Emperor saw the trap. He knew what Horus intended. But he also knew that the siege could not continue. The palace was falling. The defenders were exhausted. And every moment he remained bound to the golden throne was another moment the demons clawed at the edges of the webway gate, threatening to break through and devour Terra from within. The gambit was desperate, but desperation had become the Imperium's only currency. The Emperor rose from the throne, entrusting its operation to Malkador the Sigillite, his closest advisor and friend, a gesture that would kill the ancient Psyker even as it bought Terra precious hours. And he teleported to the Vengeful Spirit, accompanied by Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, and a contingent of custodians and Imperial Fists Terminators. The interior of the Vengeful Spirit had been transformed into a nightmare. Corridors twisted into impossible geometries. Walls wept blood. The very air was thick with the presence of the warp. The boarding party was scattered almost immediately, teleportation interference casting them across different sections of the ship. Dorn and his Terminators found themselves fighting through hordes of possessed traitors. The custodians carved their way toward what they hoped was the bridge. And the Emperor and Sanguinius, alone, walked through the madness, drawn inexorably toward the throne room where Horus waited. Sanguinius reached it first. He stood before his brother, the one he had once called friend, and saw what Horus had become. The War Master's body was swollen with chaos, his armor fused to his flesh, his face a mask of divine arrogance. And Sanguinius, his heart breaking, raised his blade. The duel between Sanguinius and Horus was not a clash of equals. The angel was exhausted, his psychic foresight showing him a vision of his own death, yet he did not falter. He fought with all the grace and fury of a demigod, his blade a streak of golden light in the darkness. But Horus was beyond mortal limits now, empowered by all four chaos gods, his every blow carrying the weight of the warp itself. Sanguinius fought brilliantly, desperately, and he even managed to wound Horus, a single crack in the War Master's armor that would prove significant. But in the end, it was not enough. Horus caught the angel by the throat, lifted him high, and broke him, snapping the Primarch's spine and tearing his wings from his back. Sanguinius died, and his death sent a psychic scream through the warp that his sons, the Blood Angels, would feel for the next 10,000 years, a rage and sorrow that would manifest as the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. The Emperor arrived to find his son's broken body on the floor. He looked at Horus, and for a moment there was silence. The weight of all that had been lost hung between them. The dream, the unity, the brotherhood. And then Horus attacked. The battle that followed was beyond mortal comprehension. Psychic lightning arced through the throne room. The ship itself buckled under the force of the powers unleashed. Horus struck the Emperor again and again, each blow fueled by the might of the Chaos Gods, and the Emperor, for all his power, was holding back. He could not bring himself to destroy his son, not completely. He sought to redeem Horus, to drive out the corruption and reclaim the man he had made. But Horus was gone. There was nothing left to save. And in his hesitation, the Emperor was struck down, his body shattered, his psychic presence dimmed. A single moment changed everything. A mortal, a lone Imperial army soldier whose name has been lost to history, saw the Emperor fall. He saw Horus raise his weapon for the killing blow. And he charged. Not with any hope of victory. Not with any delusion that his lost gun could harm a demigod. He charged because it was the right thing to do, because someone had to, because the Emperor could not be allowed to die alone. Horus, amused by the audacity, turned his gaze upon the soldier and obliterated him, not with a blade or a bolt, but with a gesture, unmaking the man from existence with a thought. And in that act of casual, contemptuous cruelty, the Emperor finally saw the truth. His son was gone. The thing wearing Horus's face was nothing more than a puppet of the dark gods, and it had to be destroyed. The Emperor unleashed his full power. Not the measured strength of a general or the restrained might of a father, but the unfiltered, overwhelming psychic fury of a being who had walked among humanity since its dawn. He tore into Horus, not just body but soul, burning away the corruption, shattering the blessings of the Chaos Gods, ripping the War Master's essence apart strand by strand. Horus screamed. The Chaos God screamed. And for a single, fleeting moment, the man Horus had once been surfaced, looking into his father's eyes and understanding what he had done. And then he was gone, utterly and completely, his soul annihilated so thoroughly that not even the warp could reclaim it. The War Master was dead. But the Emperor had paid the price. His body was ruined, his psychic essence barely clinging to the shattered husk of his mortal form. Dorn found him moments later, teleporting into the throne room with his surviving Terminators. He looked upon the scene, upon the bodies of Sanguinius and Horus, upon the Emperor's broken form, and for the first time in his life, Rogel Dorn felt despair. He gathered his father's body and returned to Terra, where the remnants of the Imperium's leadership had gathered. The traitors, leaderless and pursued by the arriving fleets of Guilliman and the Lion, fled into the warp. The siege was over. Terra had been saved. But the cost was incalculable. The Emperor, barely alive, was interred within the Golden Throne, his failing body sustained by the device that had once been meant to power the webway. 1,000 psychers each day would be sacrificed to sustain him, their souls fed into the throne's mechanisms to keep the Emperor's psychic light burning, guiding humanity through the warp as the Astronomicon. The Imperium that emerged from the heresy was not the one the Emperor had envisioned. The dream of unity was dead, replaced by suspicion and dogma. The Space Marine legions were broken apart into smaller chapters to prevent any one force from wielding the kind of power Horus had commanded. The imperial cult, the belief that the Emperor was a god, took root despite his own teachings to the contrary, spread by the traumatized survivors who needed to believe that their suffering had meaning. And across the galaxy, the traitors who had fled established their own empire within the Eye of Terror, the massive warp rift that had once been the domain of the Eldari. They would lick their wounds, gather their strength, and wait. The Long War, as they called it, had only just begun. And the Imperium, bleeding and broken, would spend the next 10,000 years trying to survive the consequences of that single, terrible betrayal. 10,000 years is not a measure of time that the human mind can truly grasp. It is a span so vast that entire civilizations rise and fall within its shadow, languages evolve and die, and the reasons for wars fought in the distant past become myths indistinguishable from lies. The Imperium of Man, the empire that clawed its way from the ashes of the Horus heresy, has endured for 10 millennia, and in that endurance, it has become something its founder would barely recognize. The dream of reason and enlightenment, the imperial truth that sought to banish superstition and elevate humanity through science and unity, has been replaced by the imperial creed, a dogma so rigid and so absolute that questioning it is heresy punishable by death. The Emperor, who rejected worship and divinity, is now the God Emperor, and his name is invoked in prayers uttered by trillions who will never see Terra, never know his true will, and never understand that they are the very thing he fought to prevent. The Imperium is vast. 1,000,000 worlds, perhaps more, scattered across the galaxy, each one a single thread in a tapestry so complex that no single mind, human or machine, can comprehend its full scope. There are hive worlds, planets where the population numbers in the hundreds of billions, crammed into towering cities that blot out the sun, where entire generations live and die without seeing the sky. There are forge worlds, ruled by the Adeptus Mechanicus, where the air is choked with promethium fumes and the ground trembles with the operation of god machines that churn out weapons and ammunition in quantities that defy comprehension. There are agri-worlds, breadbaskets whose sole purpose is to feed the insatiable hunger of the Imperium, their surfaces stripped bare by industrial farming that cares nothing for sustainability. And there are death worlds, feral worlds, shrine worlds, pleasure worlds, and countless others, each one tithed for resources, for soldiers, for psychers to feed the Golden Throne, for anything and everything the Imperium demands. But this vastness is also the Imperium's weakness. Communication across such distances is slow, reliant on the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon emanating from the Golden Throne that allows navigators to guide ships through the warp. Without it, travel would be impossible, and the Imperium would fragment into isolated pockets, each one prey to the Xenos and the heretics that lurk in the darkness. Even with the Astronomicon, the Imperium is a lumbering giant, slow to react, slower to adapt. Orders issued from Terra can take years to reach their destination. By the time a response is formulated and dispatched, the situation has often changed beyond recognition. The Administratum, the vast bureaucratic machine that manages the Imperium's logistics, operates on reports that are decades out of date, making decisions based on information that may no longer be true. And yet, somehow, the Imperium endures, held together not by efficiency or wisdom, but by the sheer inertia of its own mass. The Adeptus Ministorum, the Ecclesiarchy, preaches the divinity of the Emperor from every pulpit and voxcaster. Their missionaries spread across the galaxy, carrying the imperial creed to worlds that have never heard it, converting the faithful and purging the heretical. The imperial cult is not a monolithic entity. It is a fractured mess of competing sects, each with their own interpretations of the emperor's will, their own saints, their own rituals. Some sects preach humility and service. Others demand blood sacrifice and self-flagellation. The ecclesiarchy turns a blind eye to these differences as long as the tithes flow and the prayers continue. Faith is the glue that holds the Imperium together, a shared delusion that the suffering is purposeful, that the emperor watches over his children, that one day he will rise from the golden throne and lead humanity to victory. It is a lie. But it is a lie that a billion souls cling to every day, because the alternative, the truth that they are alone and that the emperor may never wake, is too terrible to bear. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars, are the keepers of technology, and they hoard it like dragons hoard gold. They have forgotten that science is a process of discovery and experimentation. To them, technology is a religion, and the standard template constructs, the STCs, are holy relics that must be preserved and revered, never altered, never improved. Innovation is heresy. The machine spirits that inhabit every device, from the smallest data slate to the largest starship, must be appeased with ritual and prayer. The rites of activation, the litanies of ignition, the canticles of repair, these are not superstitions to the Mechanicus. They are doctrine. And so the Imperium stagnates. The weapons it wields are the same weapons it wielded 10,000 years ago. The ships that ply the void are ancient, their systems half understood, maintained by rote and ritual rather than knowledge. There are no new designs. There are only rediscoveries, fragments of lost technology that the Mechanicus treats as divine revelation. The Inquisition stands apart from the rest of the Imperium's institutions, answerable only to the Emperor himself, or so they claim. They are the watchdogs, the enforcers of orthodoxy, the hunters of heretics, xenos, and demons. An inquisitor's authority is absolute. They can commandeer entire fleets, requisition the resources of entire worlds, and order the extermination of populations if they deem it necessary. There are three major ordos: the Ordo Hereticus, which hunts heretics and rogue psychers, the Ordo Xenos, which combats alien threats, and the Ordo Malleus, which faces the demons of chaos directly. Each ordo has its own methods, its own philosophies, ranging from the Puritan factions who believe in absolute purity to the radical factions who are willing to use the tools of the enemy, demon weapons, and forbidden knowledge to achieve their goals. The Inquisition is feared, and rightly so. They operate in the shadows, and the mere presence of an inquisitor on a world is a sign that something has gone terribly wrong. The Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, is the backbone of the Imperium's military might. Trillions of soldiers drawn from every corner of the galaxy, equipped with lost guns and flak armor, and sent to die on battlefields whose names they cannot pronounce for reasons they do not understand. The Guard is not an army of heroes. It is a meat grinder. Regiments are raised from their homeworlds, tithed as part of the imperial tax, and shipped out to the front lines. They fight not because they believe in the Emperor's divine will, though many do, but because they have no choice. The commissariat, the political officers attached to every regiment, enforce discipline with a bolt pistol, executing cowards and deserters on the spot. The Guard's tactics are simple: overwhelm the enemy with numbers, saturate the battlefield with lost fire and artillery, and advance regardless of casualties. It is brutal. It is wasteful. But it works because the Imperium can always raise more regiments, can always replace the fallen, can always send another wave of soldiers into the fire. And yet, for all its cruelty, for all its inefficiency, the Imperium survives. It survives because of the Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes, who stand as living legends, the Emperor's angels of death. They are fewer now than they were during the Great Crusade, their legions broken into chapters, but they remain the Imperium's greatest weapon. Each chapter is a self-contained brotherhood, 1,000 warriors bound by oaths and tradition, equipped with the finest weapons and armor the Imperium can produce. They are deployed to the most critical war zones, the battles where the fate of worlds hangs in the balance. And they do not fail. Or if they do, it is because the enemy was so overwhelming that even demigods could not prevail. The chapters are as varied as the worlds they hail from. The Ultramarines, disciplined and strategic. The Blood Angels, noble but cursed by the rage of their fallen Primarch. The Space Wolves, savage and loyal. The Dark Angels, secretive and haunted by a past they will not speak of. Each one a different facet of the Emperor's vision, each one a reminder that humanity, for all its flaws, is capable of greatness. But the galaxy does not exist in isolation. The Imperium is besieged on all sides, not by a single enemy, but by a multitude. The Orcs, green-skinned Xenos who live for war, sweep across the stars in ramshackle fleets, driven by a psychic gestalt that makes them stronger the more of them there are. They are crude, violent, and utterly unstoppable when gathered in sufficient numbers. A single orc is a nuisance. A million orcs is a whack. A tidal wave of violence that can drown entire sectors. The Imperium has fought them for millennia, and yet they keep coming, because orcs reproduce through spores, and every battlefield they die on seeds a new generation. The Eldari, the Eldar, are the remnants of a once great empire that fell to decadence and excess, birthing Slaanesh in the process. They are few now, scattered across craft worlds, massive starships that house the last survivors of their race, and the Webway, a dimension they once controlled but no longer fully understand. The Eldari are arrogant, viewing humanity as Mon-K, a lesser race, yet they will sometimes aid the Imperium if it serves their own inscrutable purposes. They are masters of psychic power and technology far beyond anything the Imperium possesses, but they are dying, a race on the brink of extinction, clinging to survival through prophecy and manipulation. The Necrons, ancient machines encased in living metal, are awakening from a 60-million-year slumber. They were once the Necronter, a mortal race that made a pact with the Tan, the star gods, and were transformed into undying automatons. They sleep in tomb worlds scattered across the galaxy, and when they rise, they do so with the intent to reclaim the galaxy they once ruled. Their technology is incomprehensible, their warriors nearly indestructible, and their goals utterly alien. The Imperium does not understand them, and what it does not understand, it seeks to destroy. The Tyranids, extragalactic horrors, are perhaps the most terrifying threat. They are a hive mind, a swarm of bioengineered organisms that devour all biomass in their path, consuming entire worlds and leaving nothing but barren rock. They do not negotiate. They do not retreat. They simply consume. Hive fleets the size of solar systems drift through the void, and wherever they go, they bring extinction. The Imperium's only defense is to burn worlds in their path, denying the Tyranids the biomass they need to grow. It is a strategy of desperation, and it is unclear how long it can be sustained. And then there is chaos. The traitors who fled into the Eye of Terror after the Horus Heresy have not been idle. They conduct raids, launch black crusades that spill out from the warp, bringing demons and corrupted space marines to wreak havoc on the Imperium. The greatest of these is Abaddon the Despoiler, the successor to Horus, who has launched 13 black crusades over the millennia, each one a catastrophe that costs the Imperium millions of lives. The servants of chaos are not mere soldiers. They are fanatics, empowered by the warp, driven by a hatred so intense it has burned for 10,000 years. And the Imperium, bound by its own dogma, struggles to adapt, to respond, to survive. The age of the Imperium is not an age of glory. It is an age of slow decay, of battles fought not for victory, but for survival, of a species clinging to existence by its fingernails, praying to a god who may no longer hear them. The Cicatrix Male Dictum. The Great Rift. A wound in reality so vast that it splits the galaxy from north to south, a tear through which the warp spills in an unending torrent of madness and horror. It began in the closing years of the 41st millennium, the result of the fall of Cadia, the fortress world that had stood for 10,000 years as the gate guardian against the Eye of Terror. Abaddon the Despoiler, in his 13th Black Crusade, finally succeeded where 12 previous attempts had failed. He shattered Cadia, using ancient devices called Blackstone Fortresses to destroy the pylons that had kept the warp at bay. The planet broke, and with it, the restraints that had held back the tides of chaos. The rift erupted, and the Imperium, already teetering on the edge of collapse, was torn in two. To the north of the rift lies the Imperium Sanctus, the sanctified Imperium, where the light of the Astronomicon can still be seen, where ships can still navigate the warp with some semblance of safety. To the south lies the Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, cut off from Terra, plunged into perpetual darkness. Worlds in the Nihilus cannot see the Astronomicon. Warp travel is even more perilous than usual, with entire fleets vanishing into the Immaterium, never to be seen again. Communication is nearly impossible. The tithes do not flow. The armies do not come. The people of the Nihilus pray to the Emperor, but their prayers echo into a void that offers no answer. They are alone, abandoned not by choice, but by the cruel geometry of the galaxy itself. And in that isolation they die. Some fall to chaos, their faith broken by despair. Some are consumed by Xenos. Some simply starve, their worlds unable to sustain themselves without the support of the wider Imperium. Terra, the throne world, stands on the brink. The palace, still bearing the scars of the siege 10,000 years ago, becomes a fortress once more. The High Lords of Terra, the council that governs the Imperium in the Emperor's name, scramble to respond to a crisis that defies comprehension. Reports flood in from across the galaxy, each one more dire than the last. Sectors gone dark. Hive fleets advancing unchecked. Orc wafts sweeping through vulnerable systems. Chaos cults erupting on worlds that had been loyal for millennia. The Imperium is not merely under attack. It is collapsing. And there is no clear solution, no strategy that can address the sheer scale of the catastrophe. The Adeptus Ministorum preaches that this is the end times, that the Emperor's judgment is at hand. The Mechanicus retreats into their forges, hoarding what little they have. The Inquisition burns heretics by the millions, as if purging the impure will somehow stave off the inevitable. But in the darkest hour, a legend returns. On Makridge, the homeworld of the Ultramarines, within the fortress of Hera, there stands a stasis field containing the body of Robot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, struck down 10,000 years ago by a poisoned blade wielded by his traitorous brother Fulgrim. He has been preserved, neither dead nor alive, a monument to a bygone age. And now, through the machinations of the Eldari, specifically the Archmagos Belisarius Cawl and the Inari, the faction of Eldar who seek to awaken Iniad, the god of the dead, Guilliman is revived. The stasis field is shattered. The poison is purged. And the Primarch opens his eyes to a galaxy he no longer recognizes. Guilliman's first moments of consciousness are not triumphant. They are horror. He sees the Imperium that has risen in his absence, and he is revolted. The imperial cult, the worship of his father as a god, is an abomination to him. He remembers the Emperor's teachings, the imperial truth, the rejection of superstition. And yet, he is surrounded by priests chanting litanies, by soldiers who kneel before him not as a commander, but as a demigod, by a bureaucracy so bloated and so corrupt that it can barely function. He sees the stagnation, the cruelty, the waste. He sees an empire that has turned inward, devouring itself in a desperate attempt to survive. And he understands, with a clarity that is almost unbearable, that this is what his father's dream has become. A nightmare. A theocracy built on lies and sustained by suffering. But Guilliman is a pragmatist. He does not have the luxury of despair. The galaxy is burning, and there is work to be done. He takes command, not as a conqueror, but as a steward, a lord returning to a household that has fallen into disrepair. He gathers what forces he can, the Ultramarines, the newly revealed Primera Space Marines, a new generation of Astartes created by Cawl using the genetic template of the Primarchs and technologies that push the boundaries of what the Imperium thought possible. They are larger, stronger, better equipped than their predecessors, and they are desperately needed. Guilliman organizes the Indomitus Crusade, a military campaign on a scale not seen since the Great Crusade itself, aimed at reclaiming the worlds lost to the Great Rift, at pushing back the enemies that threaten to overwhelm humanity. The Indomitus Crusade is not a tale of easy victories. It is a grinding, brutal slog across a galaxy that seems determined to resist salvation. Guilliman splits the Crusade into multiple fleets, each one tasked with securing a region, re-establishing contact with isolated worlds, and exterminating the threats that have taken root in the Imperium's absence. The Primarch himself leads from the front, his presence a rallying point for the defenders, a symbol that humanity is not yet defeated. He fights demons on plague-racked worlds. He liberates hive cities from orc occupation. He stands upon the bridges of warships as they engage chaos fleets in the void. And with every battle, he learns more about the galaxy he has awoken to, and the knowledge weighs on him like a shroud. Guilliman eventually makes the pilgrimage to Terra, to the Imperial Palace, to the Sanctum Imperialis where the Emperor sits upon the Golden Throne. He is granted an audience, a moment alone with his father, a conversation that no record will ever capture because Guilliman himself refuses to speak of it. When he emerges, his face is set, his eyes distant. Whatever passed between them, whatever words or visions were exchanged, have left a mark. Some say Guilliman wept. Some say he raged. Some say he simply stood in silence, confronted by a truth too vast to comprehend. But when he leaves the sanctum, he returns to the crusade with renewed purpose. He does not speak of salvation. He does not promise victory. He simply continues to fight, because that is what a Primarch does, because that is what the Imperium needs, because the alternative is to surrender, and that is something Robot Guilliman will never do. The Indomitus Crusade achieves victories, but they are Pyrrhic. Worlds are reclaimed, but at staggering cost. The defenders who held out during the dark years of isolation are often broken, traumatized, their populations decimated, their infrastructure in ruins. Guilliman's fleets bring supplies, reinforcements, hope, but it is a drop of water in an ocean of need. The Great Rift continues to rage. The Imperium Nihilus remains largely cut off, and the enemies of mankind do not relent. The Tyranids continue to advance, hive fleets adapting to every tactic the Imperium throws at them. The Necrons awaken in greater numbers, their tomb worlds stirring to reclaim the galaxy. The Orcs grow bolder, sensing the Imperium's weakness. And the forces of chaos, emboldened by the rift, launch raid after raid, each one a reminder that the long war is far from over. Guilliman recognizes that military might alone will not save the Imperium. He begins to implement reforms, attempting to address the rot that has festered for 10 millennia. He curtails the power of the ecclesiarchy, or at least tries to, though the priests resist with a fervor that borders on open rebellion. He works with Belisarius Cawl to rediscover lost technologies, to push the boundaries of what the Mechanicus deems acceptable, earning the ire of the traditionalists on Mars. He reorganizes the administratum, cutting through layers of bureaucracy that have accumulated like sediment. But for every reform he implements, there is resistance. The Imperium is not a machine that can be repaired with a few adjustments. It is an organism, vast and diseased, and every attempt to heal one part causes another to fester. There are whispers among the faithful, among the priests and the pilgrims, that the Emperor is changing, that the prayers of trillions, sustained over 10,000 years, have fed his presence in the warp, transforming him from a man into something else, something vast and terrible and divine. There are reports, unconfirmed and often dismissed as delirium or heresy, of miracles. Of ships lost in the warp guided home by a golden light. Of demons repelled by the sudden appearance of a figure clad in radiant armor. Of entire worlds saved at the last moment by interventions that cannot be explained. The imperial cult seizes on these stories, weaving them into the liturgy, proclaiming that the Emperor is awakening, that he is preparing to rise from the Golden Throne and lead humanity to final victory. Guilliman hears these tales and says nothing, because he does not know if they are true, and he cannot afford to be distracted by hope that may be false. The galaxy is fractured. The Imperium is broken. And yet, humanity endures. Not because it is strong, but because it is stubborn. Not because it is virtuous, but because it refuses to die. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum march into battle knowing they will not return. The Psychers sacrificed to the Golden Throne accept their fate with prayers on their lips. The Space Marines stand as bulwarks against the dark, not because they believe victory is possible, but because standing is all they know. And Robot Guilliman, the returned Primarch, the last loyal son, looks out across this empire of ashes and asks himself if there is any point to the struggle, if the Imperium can ever be more than what it is. He does not have an answer, but he continues to fight. Because that is what a Primarch does. Because that is what his father, God or corpse or something in between, demands. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and someone must stand against it. The timeline of Warhammer 40,000 is not a story of triumph. It is a chronicle of decline, of a species that reached for the stars and found only suffering. It is a tale of heroes whose names are forgotten and villains whose sins are erased by time. It is the slow death of hope, stretched across 10,000 years, and the stubborn refusal of humanity to accept its fate. There is no happy ending. There is no salvation waiting at the end of the road. There is only the next battle, the next world to defend, the next heresy to purge. And in that endless cycle, in that grinding wheel of violence and faith, humanity finds its purpose. Not in victory, but in survival. Not in glory, but in defiance. The Emperor endures. The Imperium endures. And as long as there is a single human heart that beats in the darkness, the war will continue. Forever. Without end. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.